The first sign that my marriage had rotted. All the way through was not lipstick, perfume, or an unexplained hotel charge. I found it at 6:14 on a Thursday morning, while standing barefoot in spilled cereal, holding a lunchbox in one hand, and my husband's phone was on the kitchen. Island, screen lit from a message preview. He had not yet cleared. He had gone downstairs to move the car, because the street sweeper had started, barking through its loudspeaker, and the phone kept vibrating against the granite like an insect trying to escape. The sender was his executive assistant, Lena. The preview read, "You sounded dead. Inside in that recording. Poor you." I do not know what made me open it. Perhaps because I had spent 3 years telling myself that exhaustion explains many things and that mature women do not. Perhaps because I had slept 4 hours in total over the previous 2 nights and had lost the ability to protect my own. When I tapped the thread, his reply was, "Already there. You heard her. This is my soundtrack every night. If I stay late at the office, at least know. One is crying, spilling things, or asking me to do fractions." Below it was the 42 seconds long, my voice flattened by fatigue and
frustration, telling our son Noah to
please stop kicking the table and finish, his little voice whining. A chair. Scraping. Me taking a breath that sounded far rougher than I had imagined in the then my husband Evan in the background. Laughing softly, he had recorded me. Without my knowledge. He had shared it too. The toast popped up behind me and burned. Because I had forgotten the setting. Milk. Ran over the counter edge. Noah, still in dinosaur pajamas, wandered in, rubbing his eyes, and said, "Mama, are you mad already?" I set the phone down. "Not at you." That was true. Anger at children is often just despair wearing the wrong coat. Noah was 6, bright and sensitive, and forever a little behind the neat developmental charts his teachers liked to. He still froze when instructions came too fast. He still mixed letters when tired. He still forgot to chew and breathe there had been specialists, speech, appointments, occupational therapy, worksheets, sticker charts, food, and a parade of advice from people who slept uninterrupted and believed routine was a moral virtue rather than an. For 2 years I had managed it mostly alone. Evan would describe himself as a devoted father. In photographs, he smiled at school recitals, bought premium sneakers, knew how to kneel and put both hands on Noah's shoulders when what he did not do was learn medication, timings, remember the name of Noah's therapist, or withstand 20 uninterrupted minutes of homework without handing the problem back to me. That morning, he came back up breathless, keys in hand, suit jacket half on, and found me standing by the island with his. "What are you doing?" I looked at him and noticed absurdly small things. The nick on his jaw from shaving too fast, the coffee, the way his hair at the temples had started to gray in threads even though he still pretended he was a young man being. "Playing your soundtrack," I said. The color in his face shifted, not guilt. Annoyance first, then calculation. "Why are you in my messages?" "Why am I in your messages?" I repeated. "Evan, you recorded me. You sent it to your assistant." He exhaled sharply, already tired of the inconvenience. "It was a joke. That is, because I would hate to mistake contempt for intimacy." Noah started coughing. The cereal was still on the floor. The toast. My husband glanced at his watch. "Can we not do this right now?" he asked. "I have a board prep at 8. And there it was. The real hierarchy of the house, spoken plainly at last. Board prep. School. Drop off. Coughing child. Burned toast. If this were a story told by someone kinder to herself, that would have been. The moment I left, it was not. It was simply the first moment I stopped lying about where I stood. There had been warning signs, of course. Marriages do not. They fray quietly along 20 that go uninspected. I met Evan in graduate school at 24, when ambition still looked romantic and sleep deprivation passed for. We were both in public policy, both underfunded, both children of families who regarded emotional support as a decorative. He understood the pleasure of being taken seriously in rooms that assumed you were provisional. I understood what it means to want a life so badly you're willing to work through fever for it. For a while that was. We dated on bad coffee and shared Subway cards. He used to wait for me outside the library at midnight with paper cups of noodle soup because he knew I forgot to eat when once After I cut my foot on broken tile, in our first apartment, he carried me down 4 flights to urgent care in the rain. In those years, he touched me as if I were not a burden to be managed, but a fact, around which he wanted to organize his own. When Noah was born, I thought that fact would deepen. Instead, it dispersed. The pregnancy had been difficult in ways that blood pressure issues, a cesarean I did not want, and a recovery, full of bruises, leaking milk, panic, and the peculiar humiliation of needing help to sit upright while visitors said things like enjoy every moment. Evan tried at first. He sterilized bottles. With military intensity, he took paternity. Lee even learned the wrong lullabies, but at 3 a.m, holding a screaming infant under the kitchen light. We once looked at each other and laughed from sheer wreckage because neither of us had changed out of old university t-shirts. Then his promotion came. Then the restructure, then the expansion, then the temporary stretch where he needed me to cover home completely because the next 6 months would decide. Then another. At first, I believed the story because I had helped write it. I told myself that one of us pushing hard, while the other held the ground, was not inequality, but teamwork. I had a consulting role then, flexible, enough to blur around naps and doctors' appointments. When Noah's delays became impossible to finesse and daycare called twice a week about biting, bolting, or total shutdowns, I left work on paper only for a while. While it became 3 years, I freelanced when I could. Policy, summaries, grant narratives, education, content. Paid enough to remind me I still had a mind. Not enough to count as respectable. In the way salaried men like Evan, every time I asked for grocery money or therapy fees, he would transfer it immediately. He never withheld. That was, dependence feels almost harmless when the person financing it uses a calm tone in a generous banking app, but dependence is, the first time he said, I already moved. $12,000 this month. Where does it
All go? He asked it lightly, standing in.
He did not shout. He did not accuse. He simply introduced shame into the room and let it settle into the wallpaper. After that, I tracked every receipt like a criminal defense attorney. Noah's occupational therapist, speech therapy, 2 pairs of sneakers because he wore the soles sideways from anxiety pacing, a weighted blanket, electricity, groceries, my mother's train fare when she could manage a weekend to help. Still, the shame remained because money you request always arrives with a shape of permission around it. By the time Lena entered the company, I was already living at a disadvantage. She did not need to create young enough to look polished at 8 PS, unattached enough, admiring enough to make Evan feel like the disciplined hero of a high-performing life. Instead of a man who had outsourced she was 26, newly hired, striking. In the curated way corporate girls sometimes are, immaculate skin, expensive. She called me Nora G the first time we met at a holiday dinner, smiling as if we were cousins rather than women being. Evan said she was gifted, efficient, hungry. She reminds me of you before you started. Apologizing for being tired, he told me once, and seemed genuinely surprised when that should have been its own warning. Instead, I filed it under marriage A, category into which women are taught to shovel all injuries that arrive without. After the voice note, I began noticing how many of my days had hardened into something close to emergency management. Negotiate socks. Find the blue cup, not the green one. Coax toothpaste onto the brush without touching the handle because reheat rice balls. Answer the school's parent group where every notification felt like homework for mothers. Check whether refill the inhaler spacer bag. Chase Evan for some tiny agreed. Task, toast, dishwasher, a single signature on a permission. Slip only to discover that his version of helping was saying yes, and then, once the house emptied, a second shift began. Laundry, grocery inventory, insurance forms, freelance deadlines in, then the afternoon pivot into pickup. Snack, decompression, therapy homework, ordinary homework, meltdown prevention, sterilizing cup lids we were probably years too old to still need, and the lonely math of bedtime when you calculate whether there is any version of the evening in which you are still. Evan liked to describe this period of our marriage as chaotic. The word made it sound as if weather had done it. Labor had done it, and most of the labor had a name, mine. The week after the voice note, he came home early twice and tried a new performance, attentiveness under. He loaded plates into the dishwasher while talking loudly about how we all needed to reset our tone at home. He sat beside Noah for homework, lasted 11 minutes, and then said, "Buddy, focus," in the strained voice of a man. He even brought flowers one evening, supermarket roses wrapped in baby's breath, and placed them on the counter with the ceremonial awkwardness of someone who wanted credit more than forgiveness. I said thank you and put them in water. This confused him far more than anger. Would have
What?
he asked finally. Nothing. You have been cold all week. I found out you send recordings of me to another woman for sport. It was one. I would hate to overstate the problem. He rubbed his eyes. You always do this. You stretch everything into a referendum on my character. Evan, I said quietly.
You made it one?
He looked at me, and for a moment I saw something almost honest pass through him. Not remorse.
Weariness.
The weariness of a man who suspects his comforts have become evidence. Then his face closed again. Lena is not the issue. She is not the
root issue, I agreed.
She is just where your contempt has learned to echo. That night, after he fell asleep with his earbuds still in, it felt obscene, like reading a stranger's obituary while she was still technically alive.
Nora Wen.
MPP, policy analyst, impact modeling, research design, program, evaluation. There I was in verbs and bullet points, competent, precise. A person who could stand in rooms, synthesize information, and be paid for conclusions rather than thanked for. I sent out 5 applications before 2A. Then 12 more over the next week. Some required cover letters explaining my employment gap with cheerful professionalism. I took time away from formal employment to manage significant family care responsibilities, during which I maintained freelance writing and policy research work. It was true and still somehow sounded like
Begging.
recruiters do not read caretaking as proof of endurance. They read it as fragile boundaries, divided attention. 2 firms rejected me automatically. 3 never replied. 1 offered a screening call and ended it. The moment they understood that family care meant not elder care for a finished. When I hung up, Noah called from the bathroom because the toilet had overflowed. That was the precise sort of symbolism life should probably be too embarrassed to use, but it rarely is. Evan came home that evening and found me, mopping with one hand and answering school email with the other. How was your day? At what? I stood up slowly and looked him in the face. At remembering why I cannot die in this kitchen. The night Noah got sick was the night I stopped waiting for my marriage too. It was late March, raining and cold, enough that the windows fogged from the inside. Evan was in Qingdao with 2 clients, and Lena, who apparently needed exposure to regional operations. He had texted from the airport lounge that morning, big, do not wait up. Love you all. Noah had come home from school tired and strangely quiet. By 8, he was burning hot. By 9, he vomited. By 10:30, he was whimpering in his sleep, skin flushed, breathing too fast. I know the script for fever. Strip layers, dose by weight, not panic. Watch the clock. Offer fluids. Count breaths. I had done it before. What I had not seen before was the way his eyes rolled suddenly upward while his whole little body went rigid in my arms. I screamed his name once, wrapped him in the nearest blanket, and ran. My phone? Screen cracked when I dropped it at the app froze. My hands were shaking too. Hard to type 120 correctly? It was nearly midnight, and the gated community road stretched ahead of me in wet yellow pools of streetlight without a. Then headlights turned into the lane and slowed. The driver was a tenant from downstairs. Chang Song, a quiet graduate student in mechanical engineering who once borrowed soy sauce from me during lockdown, and he rolled down the window and saw Noah in my arms. What happened? Fever, I said. He stopped moving, please. He did not ask. He jumped out, yanked open the back door, and together we got Noah inside. I realized only on the freeway that I was still wearing house slippers and one of Evan's old sweatshirts over my pajamas. At the emergency desk, Cheng Song handled the registration machine when my hands would not obey. He found me a charger he bought me a pair of foam slippers from the tiny hospital kiosk because mine were soaked through. He stood back when the nurses came and did not offer comfort in the performative male way that requires you to reassure them in. He was simply useful, which in crisis is a deeper kindness than tenderness. Zizier was febrile. Scary, but not the. They did a longer workup because Noah had developmental flags and this was his first. Around 4 in the morning after the intravenous fluids and antipyretics had finally softened his skin from blazing too, he opened his eyes and croaked, "Mama, do not leave." I put my forehead against his and said, "I won't." At 6:15, not because he had some husbands.
Intuition.
Because he needed a file from the study emailed before his client. I stared at the screen until it stopped. Ringing, then answered on the second call. "You are up," he said. "Can you send me the—" "It is on the desktop in the red folder. We are in the children's hospital." Silence. Then, what? Noah had a— "Why did not you call me?" I almost laughed. "Your phone was off at dinner."
Then you were asleep, I assume.
I was with— He knows, I thought. He knows exactly how.
Thin, that sounds.
"I am getting on the earliest train back," he said.
No need.
What would you be coming back to do?
Witness the aftermath. That was cruel. Also true. He came back anyway, of course. Men like Evan always arrive once. The medical danger has narrowed into logistics. He walked into the hospital room with expensive remorse written all over him. Carrying fruit no one wanted and asking every question the doctor had already answered for me 8 hours earlier. When the pediatric neurologist left, Evan finally looked at Cheng Song, who was standing by the door in yesterday's— "And you are," Song answered simply. "I drove them." Evan nodded, polite but tightened around the eyes. Jealousy is not always romantic. Sometimes it is merely the shock of discovering someone else did a small piece of your job. Later, when Noah slept again and Song had finally gone back to campus, Evan sat beside the bed and said, "That must have." "It was," I said. "And that is why I will never again build my life around the possibility of you showing up in time." The job offer arrived. It came from an education technology firm, opening a Shanghai strategy team. The hiring director, a woman named Rachel, son with hard earrings and a brisk manner, interviewed me for 90 minutes and looked not at all alarmed by the 3-year gap once we started discussing user adoption and municipal procurement timelines. She asked sharp questions. I answered them cleanly. When I left the office, I walked the length of Huaihai Road in a daze because something inside me had reopened. "So, we would like to make you an offer," she said. "Comp is comparable to your pre-leave level. The first 6 months will some travel, some late nights, likely a lot of re-entry learning. But if you want back in, this is a real seat." I stood outside a convenience store under a blinking red sign and stared at people moving past me. For a second I could not speak.
Yes, I
Said finally, "Yes, I want it." Then I hung up and cried so hard a delivery rider. That evening I called my mother first. She lives in Suzhou, technically retired, and actually serving as unpaid full-time child care for my older brother's second, a condition she likes to describe as temporary even though it has lasted 4 years. I asked if she could come to Shanghai for a few months while I transitioned back to
Work, and we hired consistent help.
She did. She said, "You want to divorce because of this, because of all of it," I answered. "And because if I do not go back now, I may not get another chance." My mother sighed the way women do when they are deciding whether your suffering counts as— "Nora, marriages go through phases. Men are all like this once the pressure gets high." He has not hit you. He has not left. Why tear everything apart? I stared at the wall while she talked. Not because I had expected rescue from her exactly, but because some child part of me still hoped my own life, said aloud in plain words, would sound unbearable enough to— stability, house, child, reputation,
age.
At 33, women are always being quietly audited. "I need you," I said, and heard my own voice thin with humiliation. "I can't," she replied. "Your brother's situation is impossible."
Right now.
Everything in me went still. That should have been the moment But hope makes fools of even intelligent women. I thought I could still engineer at night. Sitter, after school program, Evan forced into actual fatherhood. Something. Then, this time, her voice was clipped. "I am sorry," she said. "The board pulled me from the Shanghai expansion and reassigned. My staffing decisions are no longer mine." I pushed back, but the role is effectively
Gone for you.
gone, I repeated. There.
Nora, she said, more softly.
Unofficially, they got nervous when they understood the childcare situation, and officially, it is a restructure. When I told Evan that night, he leaned in the doorway of Noah's room and said, I told, these places do not gamble on someone who is been out this long, not cruelly, almost sympathetically, which was somehow worse. That really completes the experience. He
Frowned.
Don't be like that. I'm saying we need a realistic plan.
What you mean?
I replied, is a plan that keeps your life unchanged. He spread. No, I mean, Noah still needs consistency. Then perhaps I said, the consistency should come from his father for once. Noah overheard enough to ask the next morning if we were breaking the house. I knelt beside him in the hallway while he wore one shoe and one bare sock and said, no one is breaking the house. I'm just trying to find another door. He thought about that very seriously. Can I come through it too? He asked. My throat. That is the whole point. The offer that saved me came from a man who had rejected 3 of my essays the previous year. His name was Zhao Kui, and he edited short-form video narratives for a cultural media company in Jing'an. We knew each. I had pitched him several essay scripts, quiet observational pieces on urban education and family care. I called him privately a Philistine with a good sense of rhythm. When my phone rang one Sunday night and his name appeared,
Nora Wen, he asked.
Yes, I have been trying WeChat too. Are you alive? That depends who is asking. He laughed. Good. Listen, I heard through a mutual that you're looking for work.
We need a script.
Editor. Base pay is not impressive.
The.
Hours are flexible in theory and chaotic. In practice, you can do part of it from home once you prove you won't vanish.
What kind of scripts? Relationship.
Drama, workplace stories, women's vertical, content, light social critique if you are clever enough. The salary was 4,000 base plus script purchase. Fees and performance bonuses. By Shanghai, by my immediate standards, it was oxygen. I took the meeting the next day. The office was on the 9th floor above a milk tea chain and a Pilates studio full of women more moisturized than anyone in. Inside, the staff looked young enough to make me feel prehistorically married. Bright sneakers. Film school bangs, too. Zhao Kui himself was exactly what his emails had suggested, lean, rumpled. Prematurely tired, good at looking. He scanned my resume once and said, 3 years home with a child. That will either make you unusable or formidable. I'm hiring on the gamble that it is the second.
I appreciate the confidence. I
said, it is not confidence, it is curiosity. That was more honest than most employers manage in a month. The work was brutal in its own strange way. Short drama scripts require compression, velocity, emotional hooks every 20 seconds, and a willingness to make ordinary people's pain legible to strangers who are chopping vegetables, riding elevators, or pretending not to hate their commute. Zhao Kui rejected my first 5 attempts. Too literary, too fair to the husband, too subtle for episode 3. Nobody opens a video to watch a woman quietly. They open it to see whether she bites back. I bit back. I studied comment sections like field reports. I mapped. I learned how to place revelation at the point a user's thumb begins hovering to. Scroll away. During the day, I took Noah to school, handled pickup logistics, and fought with homework. At night, after he slept, Evan hated the glow of my laptop.
Are you?
Seriously doing this every night for
1,000 a month, he asked.
For now, it is escape. He rolled his eyes as if I were being melodramatic, but even small. Income changes the chemistry of a house. The first time Zhao Kui bought one of my original concepts outright for 8,000 yuan. I transferred the money into a new account and sat staring at the confirmation screen until I started shaking. It was not enough to leave, not enough to hire full-time help, not enough to alter the mortgage. It was enough to remind me that my labor could still step out of the domestic dark and become measurable again.
That month,
He noticed on the 3rd week because the transaction pattern in our shared card app changed. Are you paying for food yourself?
Yes. Why I spread peanut butter on?
Noah's toast and did not look up because I prefer buying rice without hearing how much got transferred last
Month.
He stared at me for several. You always make everything ideological.
No, I replied.
I make it visible. You just do not like that form of lighting. By midsummer, the company let me lead a project of my own. A serialized microdrama about women stuck. In respectable marriages no one else could. See from the inside. Zhao Kuo expected moderate engagement.
It?
Exploded. Comments poured in by the tens
Of thousands.
Women wrote, "This is my life." Men wrote, "Why does the husband sound like my boss?" The platform boosted it. Sponsors circled. My quarterly bonus when it hit was larger than Evan's monthly car payment. For the first time since Noah was born, not happiness exactly, velocity. Success did not soften Evan. It embarrassed him. At first he tried to dismiss it. Internet content is unstable, he said. When the first big bonus landed, don't get carried away. Then he tried to, at a team dinner, he introduced me to his colleagues as my wife. She does some online script stuff now in the same tone. Lena was there in a cream blouse with silver hoops, still young enough to imagine every room was a referendum on her. She asked, so the work from home thing finally turned into a proper hobby. I smiled and took a sip of beer. My hobby just paid more this quarter than your annual bonus pool, I said. The table went silent long enough to hear chopsticks. Zhao Kuo had once told me that timing is 90% of dialogue. I finally understood what he meant. Evan laughed too loudly and said, "She is."
Joking.
I took out my phone, opened the payroll notification, and handed it to across the table. Lena's face changed by degrees, skepticism, calculation, resentment.
Good.
I had no special desire to humiliate a 26-year-old who mistook proximity.
For power.
But I also had no remaining appetite for protecting the feelings of women who borrowed superiority from my husband's. On the drive home, Evan gripped the steering wheel hard enough that the veins stood out in his wrist.
What was that?
Clarification.
You blindsided me.
You?
Have been telling people I do not work. I never said that. You said I do some? If the goal is to make me sound decorative. He blew out a breath. Nora, do we really have to turn a dinner into a divorce hearing? Yes, I said. Because apparently that is the only venue in which you feel consequences. He parked outside our building, but did not turn off.
Why are you still talking about divorce?
He demanded. Things are better now.
You are earning again.
We can hire more.
We can rebalance.
I turned to him and saw perhaps for the first time the full structure of his hope. He wanted the old arrangement with a better mood around it, my independence, but only so long as it stopped accusing. Evan, I said, I do not want a revised version of the life that erased me. I want out of it. He stared straight ahead, Noah's backpack forgotten in the front. Footwell had tipped open. A worksheet lay face up on the mat, write one thing each. In wobbling first-grade handwriting, Noah had written, "Mama, fixing everything Baba. Money and meetings, children are often the." That night, Evan tried another tactic. He came to bed early. He touched the back of my neck the way he used to when we were still poor and in love and half-starved for each other. Don't punish me forever, he said. This is not punishment. What is it then? I looked at him in the dark. Inventory. But I did. I inventoried the apartment deed. Our savings, his investment account, my bonus. Payments, Noah's school records, therapy, the dates of every time he had traveled. When he had promised not to, the screenshots from Lena, the hospital, the retirement account values, and the text in which he had once threatened calmly, almost absent-mindedly, that if I insisted on acting irrational about divorce, he could stop handing over discretionary household funds, and then we would see how theory felt in practice. He regretted. I never let him delete it. Everyone told
Me not to leave.
my mother, naturally.
My?
Brother, more bluntly. 2 university friends who had become practical to the point of cowardice. Even Zhao Kui, when I mentioned in passing that a separation would likely become public, said, "Just make sure you do not burn your life down faster than you can build the next." 1. It was not cruelty. It was social math. Shanghai rents. School. Districts. A child with extra needs. A mortgage tied to one good income and one. The fatigue of starting over at 33 when the world prefers women to either remain coupled or start looking. But the person who surprised me most was Noah. One rainy evening after overhearing enough fractured conversation to understand the outline, he crawled into my, "If you and Baba live in different homes, do I still get to be me?" I had to bite the inside of my cheek not to cry. Yes, I told him, especially then. He thought about it. Then I want the home where people do not Sounds scared all the time.
Children do.
Not always choose the parent who loves. Sometimes they choose the parent whose nervous system they are least afraid of. Borrowing. That mattered more than any. The actual legal process began with a consultation in a small office near Sujiahui, where a woman in a charcoal suit. You are in better shape than most. Not because he is kind, because he is lazy. With evidence, her name was Lawyer He. She had the brisk patience of someone who has watched women waste years being noble. Toward men who were already drafting their, she laid out the terrain. The apartment was marital property. So were the liquid savings, the investment, gains during the marriage, and a portion of the retirement contributions. Custody would depend on practical caregiving history, housing continuity, and income prospects, not simply current. My work gap could be framed as family contribution rather than weakness if documented correctly. His flirtation with, but his digital mockery, funding threats, and repeated abdication of caregiving. Tax would help characterize the domestic. She looked at me over her glasses.
You
Are asking the wrong question, she said. Can you stop assuming that protecting his comfort is part of your burden? I did not. Answer. She smiled without warmth. Good. That usually means yes. When I told Evan I had retained counsel, he laughed in disbelief. You are hiring a lawyer to drag us both through court because I texted stupid things to an assistant. No, I said. To accurately price the years I held up. Half your life. That shook him more than
Shouting would have.
he had expected. For several weeks, he cycled through tactics, charm, flowers, favorite bakery, tarts, a weekend plan for Disneyland with, then outrage, you are humiliating us over,
nothing.
then reasonableness, let us not, weaponize a rough period, then injury. Do you know how this makes me look then? The ugliest form of sentimentality. Whatever happened to the girl who trusted me? She raised our son, I thought. She did your laundry. She waited in
Hospitals.
She died in installments, and now you want to know where she went? Out loud, I said only. She got tired of being useful to the wrong person. He stopped asking after that.
The final.
She messaged me directly one afternoon while I was in an edit meeting.
Sister!
Nora, I hope you do not misunderstand. You should support him more instead of making things harder. I read it twice. Then I sent the screenshot to Evan with one line if your assistant contacts me again about my marriage. I will include her in every filing and let your HR department learn the vocabulary. With the rest of us? He called within 10 seconds.
What did?
You do, he hissed.
Nothing, I replied. That is the point. She felt free to do it herself. He sounded truly angry then, but not at her. At me for finally refusing the old script, in which women handle embarrassment privately to preserve male surfaces in. Let him feel for once what exposure can do. The custody evaluation would have broken me if I had entered it a year. There are few experiences more insulting than having your motherhood translated into forms.
How many nights per week does?
Who attends medical appointments? Who is familiar with the child's medications, teacher contact history, developmental assessments, emotional? Evan came into the first session, confident. He had practiced. He knew the name of Noah's school at least. He knew. He wore a neutral sweater and the patient expression of a man ready to present himself as an overworked but fundamentally. Then the evaluator asked follow-ups.
What?
Dosage is Noah's rescue medication. What is the name of his occupational therapist? How often does he wake at night after?
Fevers, what does his teacher recommend?
When he shuts down during writing tasks. Who was called by the hospital the night of the seizure? What is his favorite bedtime story? By the 8th question, he knew broad identities. I knew textures. The evaluator knew the difference. Afterward, outside the office, he grabbed. I removed his hand from my sleeve one finger at a time.
What part? I asked.
Your own child existing in detail.
You turned me into a caricature.
No, I said. I stopped editing you.
The
Apartment question was harder. School stability favored keeping Noah in.
neighborhood.
Mortgage payments favored not destroying our finances. My salary had risen fast, but not enough to purchase clean independence overnight. In the end, after weeks of negotiation, lawyer, he crafted something I would not have imagined possible in the kitchen. I would keep the apartment until Noah finished primary school in that district. The equity would be rebalanced through a larger share of liquid assets to Evan and structured child support on his end. I kept my earnings, my bonus rights, and primary physical custody. He would have scheduled weekends, one evening a week. Therapy and school costs would be split. The apartment was not freedom exactly.
It?
Was infrastructure. When I signed not because I doubted it, because it looked so mundane on paper, a life broken and redistributed by clauses, numbers, and no judge interested in heartbreak.
No.
Section titled Contempt. No paragraph. Pricing the years I spent becoming small. Yet there was also relief in that impersonality. The law was not going to tell me I was asking too much from. It only cared who paid, who signed, who stayed, who parented, who could document. Perhaps that is why women finally leave. Not because the emotional pain is new, but because one day they become practical. Enough to translate pain into procedure. The last conversation Evan and I had before filing was in the empty apartment. At midnight, after Noah had fallen asleep, my mother, having originally refused to help, changed her mind the first week she witnessed the actual volume of my life in People Are Often More Moral Once Suffering can be heard through drywall. Evan stood in the living room where our wedding photo.
I do not understand why you could not just let us
Improve, he said. I was too tired for diplomacy. Because improvement was always defined as me demanding less. He sat down heavily on
The sofa.
I did not have an affair. I never left you. I looked at him for a long time. Evan, I said quietly, absence is not only physical. That was
Not theatrically.
just enough that if I had still been the woman from our second apartment with the broken tile and the midnight noodles, but grief and inconvenience often use the
Same tears.
I did not go to him. I only said, I hope one day you become the father Noah deserves without needing a wife to make. That your job. Then I went to bed and the work saved me, but not gracefully.
The.
First 6 months after separation were not triumphant. They were logistical warfare. Noah hated the calendar transitions at
First,
Baba week and Mama week night. Upset him even when we kept the language. He once cried because his shoes had stayed in the wrong apartment and declared that divorce ruined footwear. Another time he refused to get into Evan's car because Lena's jasmine perfume still lingered faintly in the back seat. Children notice contamination before adults name it. My own body carried the damage differently. The silence after Noah slept no longer contained dread, but it did contain collapse. I would sit at the kitchen table under the weak, warm light and realize I had not swallowed water since noon. Some nights I could not bring myself to cook and lived on frozen scallion pancakes and tea so oversteeped it tasted. At work, I became ruthless about competence. The women's vertical expanded. My scripts grew sharper, funnier, less. Zhao Kui, who would rather swallow nails than offer direct praise, began routing newer editors' drafts through me before he. One of my serialized projects about a woman who rebuilds her life through a neighborhood legal aid office performed. My name started appearing on internal decks instead of only in payment records. Then on client calls, then on development. The first time I was invited to pitch to investors, I wore a navy suit I bought secondhand from a consignment app and had, when I stood under the conference room, screen and outlined audience retention. Trends for women over 30 who had, not politely, seriously. Afterward, Zhao Kui handed me a coffee and said, you know, for someone who came in, looking half drowned, you have developed an power is just time with receipts. He stared, then laughed so suddenly he
Choked.
By the end of that year, my income, not because anyone gave me a redemption arc, but because I treated the work like the emergency exit it had been. And then Evan struggled in subtler ways. Without me buffering school emails, parent chats, medical reminders, gift buying, and schedule glue, his weeks with Noah became, he missed a speech appointment once and had to explain himself to a therapist who did not care that he managed regional. He forgot pajamas on an overnight and had to drive back across town. He texted me twice in a panic about fever, dosage, and once to ask where Noah's favorite blue cup had gone. I answered that boundaries felt cruel at first as one of the saddest things about marriage. Women are trained to experience ordinary. Meanwhile, Lena disappeared from the picture in exactly the banal way such women often do. She transferred to another division after HR received an anonymous internal Complaint about blurred reporting. Someone else perhaps having watched.
Enough did.
Evan looked older after she
Left.
Not tragic, just less reflected. He began trying with Noah in ways that mattered more than the marriage ever had. Building Lego for hours,
Learning.
taking him to the science museum without asking me what snacks to pack. Love, inconveniently, can begin where marriage. It was not my loss if fatherhood finally caught up to him once he could no longer outsource the scaffolding. The day the divorce decree finalized, I did not celebrate. I took Noah for noodles. After school, he slurped broth, kicked the table twice, and asked whether divorced people could still both come to sports day.
Yes, I.
Then it is okay.
Children forgive forms faster than adults. Later that night, after he slept, I stood at the apartment window and looked down at the glittering arterial roads below.
Shanghai in late summer from the
23rd floor looked like circuitry alive, overburdened. I touched the glass and realized something.
Strange.
I no longer wanted my old life
Back.
Not even the good years.
because the woman who would have fit into them had been built around hope that love alone could redistribute labor fairly if she had not been stupid. She had simply been untrained in escape. I lifted my phone, opened the banking app, and stared. Then I went into Noah's room, watched him, breathe in the dark, and whispered the only vow that mattered now. I'm not done building. What remained, after all of it, was smaller than triumph, and much sturdier. Noah grew. I worked. The apartment slowly began to feel like architecture instead of evidence. Evan became a better father than he had been husband, which I permitted without confusing it for redemption. And I learned that freedom rarely arrives as one brave leap. More often it looks like paperwork, wages, routines, and the quiet refusal to keep calling a sealed room the whole sky. If there is any lesson in my life that I trust enough to offer another woman, it is not leave him, though perhaps she should. It is this: do not wait until you are certain you deserve freedom. Most of us begin while still half convinced we are. We file papers with shaking hands. We send
Resumes from laundry rooms.
We love our
children fiercely and still resent the. We become practical before we become brave, and sometimes practicality is the braver thing. I used to think my life, marriage and divorce, dependence and work, silence and speech. It does not.
It?
Divides more subtly. Before I believed after I understood that exhaustion is often evidence, before I thought being needed meant being loved. After I learned that the most dangerous forms of need erase the person doing the giving. Before I imagined freedom as after I discovered it could look as small and solid as a bank transfer in my own name. A lawyer with my screenshots in a child asleep in a room whose rent I could help cover, a Tuesday in which no one asked whether I had earned my own. Noah once asked me what my dream was. I told him I wanted to be a bird. That was not precise enough. What I wanted was to stop mistaking a sealed room for the whole sky. Now some mornings I stand at the kitchen window with coffee in my hand while the city wakes in layers, delivery scooters, school buses, aunties buying greens, the low mechanical pulse of a place too alive to care about my private history. I carry the old version of myself with me. Still, the woman in spilled cereal, the woman in the hospital hallway, the woman at the dining table with a lawyer's card hidden under grocery coupons. Not as a wound, as a witness. Because I did not escape my fate in one clean
Cinematic gesture.
I escaped it by opening one latch, then another, until the window that had seemed painted shut finally gave. That is all freedom often is. A window. Some stubbornness. A willingness to bleed a little on the frame. And then, at last, enough air to remember that the world outside was there the whole time.